everyone, welcome back. My name is Jenny, and today we are going through part 3 of The Diviners by Margaret Laurence. This is the Diviners Readalong for 2024. And Halls of Sion is not a huge section of the book, but a lot happens in it. So we'll try to get through it together today. So Halls of Sion is a line taken from a hymn called Jerusalem the Golden, and this was Prince's favorite hymn. So it has a kind of poetic meaning to it, I think. And we open up this section with Morag getting a postcard from Peake, who has now made it to Vancouver. She has met up with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Gord. And so Morag feels kind of a sense of peace that she knows that Peake is okay, kind of. And she also has another conversation with Catherine Partrail, who is a quite famous pioneer who wrote about her experiences in the bush. And I think Morag is always kind of comparing herself or kind of putting herself down in terms of she is not really this like back to nature type, in that she doesn't really participate in like wanting to grow her own garden and, you know, raise animals and have that kind of back to nature experience. But she does want to live somewhere quiet and tranquil in order to work. So I think for her, the location she's in is more about her ability to work than it is about like being back with the land in the sense that the other people around her are. All right, so as we go into her memory bank movies, we find Morag finally leaving Manawanka for Winnipeg. So this is something she's been working for her whole life. She was saving up so she could go to university. And she moves to Winnipeg, and it's a huge culture shock for her. She feels out of place. She ends up renting a room in a very out of the way part of the city with a family who have their own problems, and she makes a sort of connection with the housewife who has 4 children, and she's in her, I think, mid to late 20s. And it's a little bit of foreshadowing. It's a little bit of seeing this kind of drudgery life that this woman is in, even though she's followed the path that women of her time were expected to follow. And so Morag sees this, but she doesn't fully understand the extent to which this woman is trapped and desperate and alone. The main person that she connects with while she's going to university is named Ella Gerson, and she even visits Ella Gerson's home and becomes a part of the family. There's already 3 girls in this family, 3 daughters and a mom, and Morag essentially becomes a 4th surrogate daughter. She finds acceptance, she finds love, she finds a kind of level of girly camaraderie, like hairstyles and lipstick, but also she's stimulated mentally because the matriarch of the family, Mrs. Gerson, is very much an intellectual, a leftist, and she is very encouraging of her daughters to be smart, to think, to be forward thinking, and not to, you know, be demure and diminish themselves for a man. So this is an important, very important connection for her, where she feels seen and she feels loved and she feels accepted by the mother in this family. And I think this was an interesting inclusion for Margaret Laurence, because while reading her Dance on the Earth memoir, she talks about how she framed this memoir, which is by the experiences of what she calls her 3 mothers. So her birth mother, her aunt who became her surrogate mother when her birth mother passed away, and her mother-in-law. And so I think the role of mother is very important to Margaret Laurence, and I think she wanted to show that maybe some sort of an homage to mothers who mother everyone, not just their own biological children, but who have a mothering presence for anyone through this character in the novel. Okay, so then we get to Brooke Skelton. And it was so interesting reading this the second time to notice that I disliked him instantly the same amount the second time as I did the first time. And I think, I do have sympathy for Brooke as a character to some degree. But what he represents in the story for me is a time of frustration for Morag falls in love with her professor. Okay, her professor basically pursues her, and as we know now, in this day and age, that type of a relationship is put into question and is seen as a power dynamic relationship that isn't not really appropriate. And at that time, that's not how it was. I mean, I'm sure there were thousands of professors who seduced and fell in love with their students. And at this time, it was a logical thing. Well, you are a young woman. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to marry you. I think there was a 14-year age difference between them. And Brooke, he wants her light. He wants her joie de vivre. There's kind of a vampire-esque essence to him where he's trying to, push his past, his unpleasant things from his past down, and Morag makes him feel happy, and so he asks her to just always be happy. And there's just so many red flags in the relationship from the beginning. And of course, I don't want her to marry this guy, but she falls in love with him. She also has that, respect and admiration for him because he's intelligent, because he's accomplished, because he's an older man. And of course, there's all those relationship dynamics that happen for women sometimes when they lose their father at a young age. And Christy never really represented that type of a man to her. He was a different type of a man, so he couldn't fill in for those things. So Brooke is here. Brooke wants to marry her. He also gives her a sense of her own sexuality, and this is also something that's opening up in Morag throughout the book. But Brooke obviously, wants to marry her, marries her, and then sexually she feels able to be free. Which is something she was always seeking as well, because she is a sexual being and she wants that relationship. And they do have a chemistry that is fulfilling to her. Before the marriage, Morag goes back to Manawaka to visit Prin and Christy, and Prin is not well. Prin is not really verbal. This brings up a lot of pain and issues within Morag, and she says, no, Brooke doesn't need to come. Brooke can't come. Brooke can't face anything negative or anything sad or anything, a little bit tawdry, I would say. He feels that Morag's family is. He doesn't want Morag to have a past. He wants Morag to be a blank slate that he is helping create. And he doesn't want Morag to carry any of her pain or share any of her pain with him. At this point, they move to Toronto because Brooke has gotten another job in Toronto, and she leaves Ella, which is very sad for her. She leaves school, and she becomes a little housewife in Toronto, taking care of Brooke, making his meals, getting his drinks, doing his laundry, cleaning the house. And this is, there's a tediousness to it. There is a level of fulfillment she feels, but I mean, she's biding her time. She's growing up essentially right now. I think this marriage represents in a lot of ways her growing up, changing from being a child to being an adult. And at this time, she starts writing a novel. And so she has all this extra time because it doesn't take that long for her to clean up the house, to take care of things. She actually really does want to have a baby. But Brooke is very resistant to this. He doesn't want anything that will take away her attention from him. And he also doesn't want her to shine or to be too intelligent or to be too accomplished. He really wants her to just be cute little wife on the side who takes care of him, who is his light and his comfort, and who is, intelligent in a kind of boxed in way, a way that he can control, a way that he knows that he's always the superior being. And so there's a lot of his psychological stuff that's coming out here. And so as she's writing her first novel, she's becoming less and less the little wife. And this is starting to bring up tension between her and Brooke, but he is indulging her. He is, not complaining about it, etc., etc. She then gets a telegram that Prin is on the verge of death, and she goes back to Manaoaka and is there just a few days before Prin dies, and they have Prin's funeral, where Jerusalem the Golden is the song that is sung. There's a beautiful passage in this section where Christie talks about how if he could have, he would have had Prin buried in the nuisance grounds. And I think this is because he really feels that, the nuisance grounds is a place of more dignity than the kind of pretentious cemeteries that are in the town itself, where all these people put on their heirs and are buried in this certain ground. So, but he's not physically capable of burying Prin or of taking her, and so he has to let that go. So when she comes back from Manaoaka this second time, the cracks in the marriage with Brooke really start to grow. And at this point, actually, I think before she goes back to Manaoaka, she's actually finished the novel. She gives it to Brooke to read, and Brooke is, kind of indulgent, also a bit condescending, maybe states the obvious to her, and tries to say good job, but obviously this isn't worth very much to her. But this is where Morag's confidence and belief of herself, which she's had her whole life and which she definitely possesses as an artist, comes out, because she packages up that novel and she sends it to a publisher. And she knows that this is something worthy, and whatever he says really has less power over her. And so this is where the power dynamics between them really start to shift. And she goes through, she gets a rejection, she sends it out again, and when it comes back this time, the publisher is interested in this novel and has sent her notes. And so she goes through it and she edits, and she, goes through that process of realizing her own work, sends it back. She does this all without Brooke knowing. I mean, obviously, you can see that this relationship has run its course at this point. She doesn't need him anymore. What he represented in her growing up is coming to an end. And it's at this point that I think at this point she does tell him about the novel, and he is, lukewarm, obviously fighting a little bit with his own feelings about himself and what that means to have a published author as a wife when he is a professor and these types of things. So we know that this is happening. We know that Morag is getting to the point where she actually believes she needs to leave Brooke. She doesn't have an out. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to leave him. And she's out walking in Toronto, and who does she see but Jules Tonnerre? Her first love, her first intimate encounter. It's very tricky to say that Jules and Morag have a love relationship. Their relationship is very complex and layered. It's not as simple as a romance. But Morag is so happy to see him, wants to catch up with him, brings him back to the apartment, makes the dinner, And when Brooke comes home, he is cold and rude and racist towards Jules. And this, makes Morag feel just so angry with him and so finished that she leaves with Jules. And they go to his room, and they are intimate and have sex together, and they consummate a relationship that wasn't originally consummated when they were young. So this has been about a decade that they haven't seen each other. So, he becomes her way out, and he knows that, and she knows that, and there's not, he knows that she's using him, but he's also using her. And he says to her, I'm not the staying kind. I don't stay with women. I'm with them for a while and then I keep going. He at this point is a singer, and he sings, he performs in bars and different cafes. And so you get this sense that, there's a connection between them, but there's also a lot of pain between them, which comes out in this encounter. Morag does end up leaving Brooke. She moves in with Jules just temporarily so she can figure out her life, get everything closed up in Toronto. She's decided to move out west and on her own. She wants to be on her own. And this is a really important movement for her. This is a really important coming of age. She's really come into herself as an adult at this point. She's no longer interested in being taken care of, in being condescended to. She's ready to be on her own, to take matters into her own hands. And so she, gets on a train and heads west. And Jules is there's a very powerful scene between them where Jules forces her to tell him about the death of his sister Piquette, which happens in the earlier part of the book. And she does tell him. And it's a very powerful passage because he blames her, but not her specifically. He blames white people and the white system for killing his sister and for oppressing his people. And it all comes out in this exchange between the two of them. And it's very, very powerful. It's very meaningful. And it's, in my opinion, a beautiful representation of the complexities of colonization and the struggle that it is for anyone with Indigenous heritage to experience a relationship with white people that, it's impossible to not have some sort of fraught complexity within you when you are faced with what one people does to oppress another. And so that's all very beautifully depicted, I think, in that scene between Jules and Morag. So the Memory Bank movies, we leave off with Morag heading out west, and in the present day, Pique returns, and Morag is so happy to see her, and you see some more evidence of Pique, finding herself, of this man Gord coming and trying to get back together with her and wanting to be with her so badly, but Pique being like, I can't be with you, like, you just have to leave. And Morag trying to console this guy Gord, but knowing from herself and from her daughter's father, who is Jules, that Pique is not going to be this good little wife, settle down partner type of woman. That's just not who she had. Her genes are a wanderer by nature, just the way Morag and Jules are. So so there's a lot of despite the tension between Morag and Pique, I think that you understand that she is a free spirit and she needs to be on her own, and Morag is trying to let this guy down easily about that. Okay, so just as I did in the first video, I just want to go through and read a few quotes for you from part 3. The first one is from the Memory Bank movie section for Spear of Innocence, which is the name of the novel that Morag is writing. And this is on my version of the book, page 185. And this is her talking to Brooke about, there's a discussion around returning to the place you've come from. So Brooke grew up in India, and they're talking about whether or not he would ever want to return to India. And this comes up: trapped in a garden of the mind, a place which no longer has a being in external reality. Is everyone? Not Morag. She wouldn't go back to Manaoaka for all the tea in China or Assam, and yet the town inhabits her as she once inhabited it. So this idea that you can leave somewhere and you can go wherever and be whatever type of person you want, but you do carry part, maybe all of who you were in another place with you. And so that's, I do find that to be true myself, not living in my hometown anymore. And I think that's a very poignant statement. And so then we go to page 188, and this is the example of the struggle of the artist who is working and then has to stop working and change into another role. And so Morag has been writing about Lilac, her main character in Spirit of Innocence, and Brooke comes home and she has to transition. She has to get out of writer Morag and the world that she's creating and turn into wife Morag and be this other person for him. And so she'll say, like, dinner isn't ready, she's not ready for him, and she hasn't taken some time, which she sometimes does, to transition herself from writer to wife. And so she writes this: odd, if you had a friend who had just aborted herself, causing chaos all around, and not only to herself, no one would be surprised if you felt upset, anxious, shaken. It is no different with fiction, more so maybe because Morag has felt Lilac's feelings. The blood is no less real for being invisible to the external eye. She wants to explain, but feels too tired. So she wants to explain to Brooke, like, listen, I've just been going through these feelings with this character. I'm very raw, I'm very upset. But she can't take that time. She's exhausted. She can't explain it to him, because while he is, a literature professor, he's not an artist, and there is a difference there in terms of how you interact with your materials. Okay, so on page 200, I loved this reflection on losing language, on having a language but not knowing it very well. So for instance, she's referring to Christy, who was Scottish, didn't know Gaelic, and but wanted to desperately. And she's also referring to Jules, who didn't know, who was Métis, but didn't know French or Cree very well. And so and the quote is, "The lost languages, forever lurking somewhere inside the ventricles of the hearts of those who had lost them." So this idea that there's something there, some knowledge, some ancestral knowledge that would be passed down, but that was stopped and that couldn't be passed down. And this is, of course, another result of colonialism that she's referring to here. The next one is from page 202. This is what I was talking about before, about Morag's, her confidence growing in her work, her confidence growing where she doesn't need Brooke's approval for things. The next day, she parcels up the mass of paper and sends it, submits it to a publisher. She does not tell Brooke. So this is just her, I don't care what you think. This is my future. I'm going without you. And then in 205, this is when Morag is home. She is there for the funeral of Prynne, and her and Christy are drinking a bottle of scotch and over the table and getting quite drunk together. They're basically having a wake for Prynne alone. There's the two of them. And I'll read you a little bit more than what I underlined, but Morag says to Christy, "Her life would have been a lot worse without you, Christy." "That," Christy says, "we don't know." "I know." "Do you then?" A momentary blue light in his eyes. "Well, you're young. You know a whole lot you won't know later on." And I love that. I think that, that is a very true statement, that when you're young, you feel like you have things figured out. And then you get a bit older and you realize you've got nothing figured out at all. And you know, I think that's another theme of this novel that is quite strong, is this idea that, you know, your different phases of life give you different realities and different interpretations of the past, the present, the future. So that's why I love this book. Okay, so that was part 3, The Halls of Sion, and the second video in this series. For those of you who have signed up for the live chat, I'm going to be sending out an email later today to figure out the time on September 22nd. That everyone can meet up. And so you still have time, if you haven't yet signed up and you would like to fill out the form. It's linked below, and you may not have time to pick the time, but I will definitely send out an email to everyone with the link for the live chat if you would like to join in, and you can just put your name on the list if you'd like to. All right, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on part 3 down below, and I will be back again next Saturday with our final check-in for parts 4 and 5. And like I said, the live show will be on September 22nd. And I'll be back again soon with another video. Thank you so much for watching.